follow Banecat. That's very upsetting. Banecat is much cooler than me. So I am a bit obsessed with our relationship sort of with and through technology. And I like to think that I'm a loving critic of technology. I love it, it's great, but that means I want it to be better. And I want to start off by talking about sandwiches. My sandwich looks really long. The screen ratio, there's a black bar at the bottom of the slide template, and when I was putting my slides together, I respected the black bar. And that means that my slides look really wide, so I apologize for that. It's a bit like having a squashed head. But this is a very long sandwich, and this is featured in one of my absolute favorite and I think most important sort of social science experiments of the last few decades that I think many of you may have heard of or be aware of anecdotally. And it's sometimes known as the Israeli judge experiment, which sounds very sinister, but isn't. It's a fascinating real-world experiment, and it took a couple of thousand cases where some judges in Israel, which is where they sort of got the data from, were seeing prisoners and trying to answer an important, difficult question. Do we parole this person or not? And they kind of randomized the sort of order of these things to get a nice kind of even spread. And they were very interested in what factors might influence experienced judges in making a difficult judgment, and one where there is a very safe default state. Someone has been found guilty, they are a prisoner. It's safe to leave them locked up. That is the default. Or, being a judge and all judgy, you can change the default and you can decide that they are ready to be granted parole. And this was partly an experiment about judgment, of course. It's about time and attention, which keep coming up again and again and again, I think quite rightly, in conversations around technology. But this is a lovely attempt to do some, as it were, sort of hard psychological studying of what goes on. So I'm going to tell you a statistic, and then we're going to interact slightly. And if you're watching at home or after the event, you can guess. It'll be fun. So I'm going to tell you, this is a true thing, after lunch, after eating a sandwich such as this, but not this, but like this, after eating their lunch, the judges in question across those thousands of cases had about a 60% chance to parole the prisoner in front of them. So you are judges, I am a prisoner. You've just had lunch. 6 times out of 10 you will say, yes, Tom has been bad, but now we are going to give him a chance to begin the path back towards society. We're going to parole him. My question to you is a simple one. 4 hours later, it's now 4 hours since you've had lunch. What is the chance now that you parole me? You are judges. I am a prisoner. I come before you, quaking in my boots. And how many times out of 10? What do you think is the percentage chance that you will parole me now? I'm just going to do a very quick kind of show of hands to gauge the vibe of the room. Who thinks it's still about the 60% mark, or maybe even a little better? Wave at me enthusiastically. Thank you. Thank you. Now we're going to bring it down. About 40, kind of 40 to 60 range hands. I'm seeing a couple of dozen hands. Okay, thank you, judges. Thank you. 20 to 40 range. Lots of pessimism in the room, and some of these hands are waving. So these are depressed, hungry judges in the 20 to 40 range. And now I want to go into the bleak realm of the 0 to 20 range. Okay, and I've got slightly fewer hands. Okay, I'm going to show you a graph now. It's my only graph. It's a wonderful graph. I love this graph. Here is the graph. This graph shows the percentage chance of me being paroled against time. And it shows that we start the beginning of the day after breakfast about 65%. Wibbly wobbly, wibbly wobbly. 4 hours later, we hit 0. And then we have 40-minute sandwich and fruit break. Words that are manna to the imprisoned man or woman, because immediately after the 40-minute sandwich or fruit break, We're back at 60%, whoopie-doo. And then we are descending with a little kind of boost as the fruit kind of kicks in, I guess. And then we're down at 10%. And then you have a 60-minute lunch break. Judges and lunches are constant throughout history. And we're back up to 60%. And then towards the end of the day, we trickle away again to zero. Zero. Not many of you were that pessimistic. This is a stunning result. And it's interpreted, I think, in kind of one way above all, which is that when you are trying to make a difficult decision requiring a high level of attention and engagement, you are using up, sort of what Daniel Kahneman and others have sort of thought of as your kind of slow, high effort, high quality attention and judgment. And that is a shockingly limited resource. It's a limited resource to do with, among other things, glucose, to do with the amount of sort of sugar, of energy available for your big, hungry, sugar-munching brain. And it's a shared resource. It's shared across all the other stuff you do. If we take our judges and we give them difficult mental arithmetic problems, that makes it go down faster. And perhaps the most shocking thing is, you show this graph to judges and you say, sort of, before I show you this, do you think how hungry you are makes any difference to your judgment? And they go, no, we don't. We're judges. The hint is in the name. Judging is what we do. We are professionals. We are experts. Come see us anytime. So without labouring the point too much, I think, there's two things that we should take away from this. And the first is, if you are in court, bring chocolate. It's very important. It's a lifesaver. But the second is a point that's reiterated again and again, I think, in a lot of the most important contemporary psychological literature, which is that our willpower, our attention, our judgment, our behavior, these are very limited, very scarce resources. They are very easily depleted, and we are absolutely rubbish at having insight into them. We are really, really bad. We may get a little hangry, think we've got some hungry, anger, wonderful word. We've got some very hangry judges there. They just want the day to be over. You should never make important decisions at the end of the day without stuffing chocolate in your face first. But we are, we're kind of interestingly, fascinatingly bad in this way, or vulnerable in this way, because as we go down a graph like this, we become more and more willing to go with the default state, to go with the flow, to maintain the status quo. We become more likely to act impulsively. We become more likely to act on suggestions. Now, can you see where I'm going with this kind of thing? Yes. So, we have a lot of business models out there which are, which are wonderful in their way, but which are to some degree entirely predicated upon what you might call the casino model. The model that, because your time and your clicks and your attention quantified according to their systems is their money, getting you to click just one more time is the supreme business aim. Check me, check me. Facebook, please, I am trying to work. And one of the terrifying things from the psychological literature, there's another lovely experiment using cookies, where essentially you get two groups of people, and you say to a lot of the people, here, have some cookies, yum, great cookies, there you are. And you say to the other people, here's some cookies, you can't have them. I just want you to sit there in this room with a table of cookies, not eating cookies. And then you give them difficult problems. And you find that the group who had to resist delicious temptation give up more than twice as quickly at a whole variety of difficult problems, because the very act of pushing down the cookie temptation has eroded their willpower and determination. The very act of resisting temptation, of not checking emails that are open in the background, of not clicking on Facebook, this is eroding your high quality attention, the attention you use for making judgments, for going into depth, and so on and so on. Now this is all beginning to sound a bit miserable, a bit miserabilist, but I am not terribly miserable about this. I love technology, and I think the interesting thing for me is this is a business model. I think it's a business model. I've been listening to talks today, some, I think really fantastic people talking about, in a sense, injecting greater value and authenticity into digital interactions. I think there's a bit of a correction going on now. The fact that a lot of what's out there at the moment grossly undervalues your time and your attention. There's a load of false assumptions out there. You are being sold as a product in terms of time and attention far too cheap. And people are pushing back against this. People, I think, sense there is a need for a much higher premium to be put on time and attention. But the difficulty is that in the meantime, we are left with Facebook and a lot of other media kind of jibber-jabbering in the background and eroding a lot of very important stuff. And I'm going to talk about why it's important. There's a lovely quote from Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize for his work around behavioral economics. And he says, when faced with a difficult question, we often answer an easier one instead, usually without noticing the substitution. This is a wonderful observation. It's not always a bad thing. The knowing substitution of an easier question for a difficult one is how we engineer solutions. But it can also be dangerous. Let's pick a question. Who would be the best president of the United States out of the current candidates? It's a difficult question, right? It's a really difficult question. And we can try and answer it. We can look at their voting records. We can look at whether they are in the pockets of noxious corporate interests, or whether in some cases they are the living embodiment of noxious corporate interests. Some of them. Or we can answer an easier question. Who looks the most presidential? Who would I like to have a beer with? Whose funny face? Ha ha ha. Difficult question. Am I loved? Do I matter? Is this good? Easy question. Do you like this or not? How many hits has it got? Like. The substitution of easy questions for difficult questions is very, very seductive. It's very powerful, especially when we are knackered, when our attention is bombarded and we're burning up that glucose resisting. And this is quite dangerous when we're not aware of it. And it's quite dangerous because we can't use willpower to pull ourselves out of this hole. It's much more about our habits, our daily practices, the way we live and behave. And also, and this is what's interesting for me, computers are getting really clever. I think finally in the last few years, people have noticed that AI is some really hot shit. It's driving cars and probably making better conversation while doing this than you can. It's moving into areas that we used to think of as the province of science fiction. Artificial intelligence is replacing lawyers. This may sound great. It's starting to read huge amounts of legal papers in looking for precedents. It's starting to at least highly complement the work of doctors in looking for symptoms. It's starting to read people's emotions, read people's emotional states by looking at micro-expressions in their faces far better than even that guy, that TV series was based on, where he could work out when you were lying from your face. And computers are getting better at this stuff faster and faster. That's in the nature of computing, these kind of crazy curves. And so we come back to this thing, well, people then, okay, what are we about? And I think the answer that comes back that we hear today is, well, we've got these bloody great brains because we are profoundly, inherently, deeply sociable animals. And when we make ourselves happy, and when we work well together, and when we achieve great things, it's because of our astonishing ability with things like empathy, with things like sociable, collaborative, authentic communication. And this is the stuff we want to do. And this is the stuff we want to do even though machines could do it for us. And the problem is that a lot of the ways that we use technology kind of hollow out these things. They kind of risk making us totally rubbish at the stuff it's most important we do. And that it's actually becoming more important that we do because machines are going to start doing so much else And the question is going to be, well, how successfully do we relate to each other through machines? How good a relationship do we have with machines? So I've written a little book. I'm not going to bang on about this, but I tried to write a book of questions worth answering. And I wrote a book. I've done 5 previous books, which are about different kinds of aspects of our relationship with technology. But I wrote a physical-only book. Really radical, I know. That you carry around with you, that you write in with a pen and paper. Not because I'm anti-tech, but because I felt very strongly that where people are at the moment with technology and time and attention, it's actually a really handy shortcut to a certain kind of undistracted time to ask people to take a physical book and write in it and sort of think at the speed of the pen and have it just as theirs and not be sharing it. To have something that's an alternative to a lot of the current pressures and rhythms of screen culture, that is a different kind. I think one of the great worries I have with tech is that if we're not careful, it turns all our time into the same kind of time, that we're always carrying around with us the same screen with the same information everywhere, anywhere, instant. And so we are in a kind of instant feedback loop, which feels great but accomplishes very little. The alternative to which is to go out and plant sweet corn in a place where you live, which I think is an absolutely fantastic idea, but perhaps something you're unlikely to do if you're just liking it so much you haven't noticed you could actually do it. This is the point of the talk when I show a picture of my cute son, because if you have a cute son, you should always use a picture of them in a talk. He's just 2 and a bit, and he's just learning to read, and I've just really noticed there's this sort of, it can seem very abstract with questions of technology and learning, and then there's this very specific concrete thing in front of me. He's starting to learn to read, and we have physical books, and we handle physical books, and we chew them. Well, he chews them, and his book is, and we turn them around, and we scribble on them and draw, and I think this is really profoundly different to if it was an iPad we were gnawing. Why is it different? They're not at all the same. We do screen stuff as well, but one of the reasons the physical stuff is so profoundly different is that, let's say, it's a feature, not a bug, of human beings that we are embodied, that we are brains in bodies, that we think not only with our brains but also with the physical stuff of us as we are in the world. We're profoundly affected by hunger. We're profoundly affected by the people we're in a room with, by the level of the lighting, by facial expressions. We're profoundly affected by physical objects. We don't have a special bit of our brain that is literate and able to read. Is that reading is only about 6,000 years old culturally. There's no dedicated, as it were, sort of reading element to the brain like there is with language. When we read, when we access information, effectively we are using the parts of our brain that are the visual and spatial centers, and they have sort of adapted plastically as we learn. So what this means in practice is, when you're reading and processing information, your brain thinks it is looking at stuff, at real objects. It's why it tends to be easier to remember things that have a geography, that have a tactility or a texture. It's why it's so difficult in web and digital design to make things memorable and impactful, because you have to conjure up a geography from scratch on a kind of flat, placeless board. So I get very bored with technology that has a kind of implicit view of humans as a pair of eyeballs to be sold ads to and a clicking finger tapping on a mouse on an advert forever. This is a very denuded vision of the human being. It's wildly inaccurate. It's not going to help us build systems that get the best out of us or each other. And hopefully it's going to change, because we are becoming more ambitious for our relations with technology. I think about email, the delights of email. I like to sometimes think of an email inbox as a to-do list written for me by other people. It's a dreadful thing, or it can be. And there's a phenomenon, I think of AI. I like to pretend it stands for artificial idiocy, which is the astonishing alchemy by which a machine can make a human behave like a total moron. And why? How? Well, partly because the software on that machine is not designed for a real, living, breathing human being. It's not designed to get the best out of them. It hasn't really rigorously begun to ask this question, what does it mean to get the best out of a person? And I think for that we have to look to the embodied humans as we are. Very quickly mention just a little startup I'm involved with, just called Everyone Can Program, not code, because you teach kids to program using 3D printed marble runs. Why do you do this, other than it's just kind of cool and makerish and the kind of thing that at South by Southwest you can sell boxes full of 3D printed stuff and people just buy it? Well, the reason is that if you've got a whole bunch of excitable 5, 6, 7-year-olds and you want to try and teach them to build the next generation of awesome software, you don't want to sit them in front of a existing piece of software and a screen and say, try and learn Pascal, please. You want to get them playing together with marble runs physically and trying to build a transistor out of it, which, yes, they can all do, because that's how people learn and how they work together. It's how you engage people. And then you take stuff over to computers as well. But you don't just treat the current tech paradigm as the solution. So in conclusion, there's this question around, I think, asked more and more nervously at the moment. What are we better at than machines? And apocalypse, we're not better at anything. We're all going to be farmed as batteries or kept in zoos or something like that. Understandable anxiety, but totally the wrong question. Stupid question, unanswerable question. Who knows? What does better even mean? I mean, better at what? Better in the sense of efficiency? No. Lots of stupid questions lie that way. Here's the question I want to ask. What are we? What are we like? What are we really actually like when we get down to it? And thus, what does it look like for us to live richly with technology, for us to collaborate with it, for us to build technology that has an elevated view of us and what we can do, that isn't just spamming us, that gets down to the brass tacks about how our brains in our bodies work. Stephen Johnson, quote to end. He's talking about creativity. He's talking about getting the most out of people. Go for a walk, cultivate hunches, write things down, keep your folders messy, make generative mistakes. We're good at this kind of thing. We're good at it when we do it together. We're good at it when we realize how precious our time is and we don't let anybody or anything sell it off too cheap. Thank you very much. Yes, sorry, I was going on, but it said time's up for 2 minutes. I'm very sorry. Okay, all right, well, this will be a quick one then. It strikes me that, to some extent, there's, some of the companies that you alluded to, and again, not to be anti-tech, but effectively I liken them to, small armies of some of the most, ambitious, well-educated folks in the world, effectively trying to get you to click or to, do things, if you will. And that, to some extent, it's almost like we have to guard against it. We're going to actively need to guard. It's just in the same way that you might need to guard against too much booze or, other such things that are effective. Because effectively, you're talking about things that are targeting, our brains and trying to get us to do things. I mean, is that your perspective on this, or? Yes, I'm really cautious about sort of analogies with food and alcohol and things like that because they're helpful, but it's much better to try and talk really precisely about how the brain and attention works rather than say it's just like being fat.
Yeah.
But I think, there's a lovely quote that made a big impact a few years ago when someone from Silicon Valley said, the best minds of a generation are working out how to make you click.
Yeah.
And I think, there is this sort of complicated situation that you have some brilliant, passionate people at some brilliant companies. And with one hand, the companies are doing amazing things and thinking very profoundly about transformative technologies and people. And with the other hand, they're going, gotta make some money, click, click, click. But the thing I really like is that it's very easy to get into a mindset where the companies are big, powerful puppeteers jerking us around all over the place. They're really not. What they are is kind of desperate leviathans who are chasing people, who are chasing behind the world. Now, they're very close behind us, so we think they're predicting the future. They're not. They're not. They are being outflanked by the culture. They are going to be disrupted. And so actually, I think it's the people who offer the better thing. It's the people who offer the better use of your time, the better contract, the better relationship, who will triumph in the long run. And I hope the bits of these companies that do that. So I am sort of, in a sense, I feel that the slightly more elevated view of us will win, because actually people, they look dumb if you sort of look collectively in the present moment, but over time, suddenly people start to look, on a species level, very smart indeed.
Tom, thank you very much.
It's my very great pleasure.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Cheers.